Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Lowdown on Low Code, brought to you by analysis.tech. I am John Rymer. I'm going to be your host here today for this episode. I'm one of the principals at analysis.tech. Was one of the people that coined the term low code and have done a lot of research on low code. And today we're going to be speaking with my newest colleague, Rick Greenwald, about research that he has been working on that I'm very excited about because it addresses the data side of the low code movement, something that frankly I am not qualified to do, have never been qualified to do, and yet is growing in importance. So very excited to have you on, Rick. Welcome.
Thank you.
And just because you are fairly new to analysis.tech, let's make sure the folks watching understand your background and how you came to be our data guy.
Well, first of all, I've always been a data guy. It's just recently I've become your data guy. My background in data goes back actually 40 years. Um, True story. When I first started in the computer field, I took a course from NYU about learning how to code, and they had a clipping up on the wall, and it was what specialties are paid? What are the highest paid specialties? And the highest paid one was networking. I thought, oh, that sounds boring, just bits down a wire, right? And the second one was database. I said, that's for me. So actually, when I started at my first job, you had an option to specialize in software. I actually was the second person to code with a SQL database put out by Data General.
Huh.
And that's been my career throughout. I mean, I spent 15 years at Oracle. And I was a Gartner for 10 years as a principal database analyst, senior database analyst there. I was
Yep.
senior guy when I left. And it's funny, you were saying like, oh, we'd like to hear a little bit about data. Yeah, you're a developer. You don't know anything about it. And it's really important, but it's in many ways, it's outside the scope of what developers' job is and what their goals are. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through.
Yep. That's great. So your latest research is about the problems, the issues with distributed data, which low code developers have a heavy hand in producing lots and lots of data sets and lots and lots of derivations of data sets, thereby creating all this distributed data. Um, what's the problem?
Well, let me just go back to why I started thinking about this, because I've been thinking about it pretty intensely for about 5 years. Keep in mind, when I say distributed data, it's not just data which is geographically distributed. That presents lots of problems of its own.
Uh-huh.
But in my book, distributed data is any data that comes from more than one database, more than one data source. Okay.
What?
And I started going on this because I do have a habit of being a bit curmudgeonly. New technology comes out, and I have my first one saying hype and hate. I kind of hate hype cycles. When you see that accelerating curve going and all these companies now have a feature they didn't have 2 months ago, and that wasn't enough time to develop it. So you realize they're just renaming it. And the feature that this was going on 5 years ago was not AI. That was before AI, but it was data meshes and data grids. And everyone had data mesh. Everyone had a data grid. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought this really doesn't do very much. I mean, everyone had it immediately because it's really easy to do. You can basically just use a pointer if you want to do it without functionality or taking care of data the way that you should. So rather than just write about it and say how everyone was full of hooey or investigate it and finding out everyone was full of hooey, I thought, well, whenever there's a hype cycle, whenever there's a hype product, there is a reason behind it. And that is what it is promising to deliver is something people really want.
Uh-huh.
Not enough to actually implement it, but enough to desire magic.
So
And what they would
what is the need, the thing that people really want that data grids and data fabrics are promising
They
to provide.
they wanted to see all their data as a single uniform pool. So people could just go in and use whatever they wanted and everything would be fine and taken care of. And that's because, by the way, they were very much focusing on the time it took to prepare data and things like that, which is, not people shouldn't be surprised like that, that it takes time to prepare data because, first of all, it takes time to prepare everything. And secondly, they think their job stops when they've developed. Well, it's being used for months and years into the future. So,
Right.
when people say I spend 80% of my time preparing data, well, how are you counting that time? So,
It's
anyways, that's what they wanted. They really
it's
wanted that. And by the way, they've been wanting that. That desire was not immediate in the IT field. It only started when the second database came up.
right.
Okay.
So it sounds, Rick, like the single source of truth, the one database the one data set that everybody can use and rely on. That sounds not like the kind of thing a low code developer worries about, but more what a data architect or a CIO or a data administration person would worry about. Have I got that right? Do they need to
Well,
really kind of come together and understand
kind
this?
of, kind of. Let me tease that out. Thank goodness low code developers don't report up to the CIO. Um,
Some do.
they, yeah, some do. No, I mean, there's a problem there. And I think what you're saying is that may be the responsibility of those data people, but it's something everyone has to worry about. But I'll
Hmm.
get to why that's not a problem for developers all the time or even frequently in a minute. But before we go, though, I want to address single source of truth. You let
Okay.
that phrase slip. I mean, that's nails on a blackboard to me. I mean, I think I was having an internal text with people at analysis.tech. I said, single source of truth is the devil. Okay. Because, well, I have good news and bad news about it. The bad news is it's really hard to achieve. And even when you achieve it, you're going to have to keep working on it from now into the indefinite future. The good news is you're going to fail. Okay. So there's no sense to worry about that. And I think it illustrates a basic misunderstanding of truth and data. And I can talk about that if you like.
Yeah. So forget single source of truth. Doesn't that mean that we've got a lot of dirty data, a lot of bad copies and everything floating around? I mean, how
No, not necessarily. Okay. Let me just step back and look at what it means for data to be correct. Because we're all going to agree we want our data to be correct, right?
Yep.
No question about that. Even developers want to have the data correct. They don't want to do anything to make it correct, but they want it to be correct, right? What does correct mean? I would contend, and I contend very strongly, that correct has no meaning in isolation. Correct only has meaning in context. In other words, what's the context of your use case? A value which may be correct in the context of one use case may not be correct in the context of a similar use case.
you have
Okay.
an example?
Yeah, yeah. How many do you want? Let me give you a simple one. Okay. And this has to do with governance. Governance is the making of rules to make sure data is correct. Let's take something simple like what's the sales price of an item? Okay. Lots of people worry about this. Lots of people across many departments, lots of similar departments in different territories. They all have to worry about it, right? So what does that mean? Well, it's a number. That's how much it costs. Okay. Well, first of all, what are you using that number for? Are you using it to send a bill to the customer? Are you using it to calculate sales compensation? Are you using it to calculate discounts? Does this territory have a discount which is implemented when these three things are true? And this territory has a discount which is implemented when three completely different things are true? Okay. And if you're saying, well, it's a number, it's got to be the same, well, it doesn't mean the same thing. And it may not be correct across that. And this is granted, companies have ways of dealing, but this is the sort of thing I'm talking about. That it may seem that they're almost similar, but it's not going to be right across all use cases. And by the way, let's say you want to take the single source of truth approach, the large mallet over the head approach to making data correct. There's two ways you can do it. You can make everyone have a single comp plan or a single sales pricing plan, which that hurts your business value. I mean, people have different things for that because it's important, because that's what they need to do. Okay.
Mhm.
The other thing is, if you want to give people that flexibility and still have a single source of truth, that single source of truth is going to have to combine all these contexts together and do it properly. And it's going to be horrendously complex. And
Was
by
those
the way, if you have 10 different ways of calculating sales amount and you have a single source of truth that combines them all together, if any one of them changes, got to go change the single source of truth.
yeah,
And by the way, when you change a single source of truth and you change the governance on that, it can invalidate all the numbers you got before because they were using a different governance pattern. So
got
you
it.
can see how this is similar to multi-user stuff. It doesn't sound very complicated until you actually see how it works in the real world.
Right. All right. Thank you, Rick. Let's take a quick commercial break. You are listening, watching, perhaps Lowdown on Low Code, a almost weekly podcast from your friends at analysis.tech. We are an advisory and analyst firm completely devoted to the low code community and its opportunities and issues. If you want to reach us, connect with us, work with us, talk with us, you can reach us at analysis.tech. You can talk to myself. You can talk to Rick. You can talk to our colleague, Rob Koplowitz, an expert on digital process automation, our colleague, Dave Marcus, who is an expert on process automation, partner strategies, business development, our friend and colleague, Francis Carden, the godfather of RPA, and our colleague, Andrew Bartels, who is the former chief economist at Forrester Research. Um, if you like what you're hearing, like us, let us know what else you'd like us to tackle. We're open to ideas, love the dialogue. So thanks for listening. Let's get back to the conversation with Rick. So Rick,
So,
you mentioned that correctness is important, and yet it's not something. It's something that developers expect, but it's not necessarily something that they work on for the greater good for the other developers. They're just focused on their project. Is there are there is there anything that developers can do or should do to contribute to a governed distributed data world?
well, here's the good news. Remember, I told you there'd be good news at the very beginning?
You did.
Here's the good news. I mean, first of all, developers are working on the correctness of data because when they work with end users and they say, what should this data be? What they're basically getting is governance rules. Okay? They may not think of it that way. They may think of it, by the way, they may implement it in their application code. What a terrible idea that is. But,
Mhm.
you know, developers live in a silo.
Yep.
So what I'm talking about are what happens when you combine different silos. I'll get back to that in a second. But there's nothing wrong with that. And the reality is, my guess is somewhere between 80 and 85% of all systems live in a data silo.
Mhm.
They don't have to worry about any of these issues. Okay. Even more importantly, if you're looking at having a unified data universe, keep in mind 85% of your systems don't need that. So
Mhm.
you can't override what they do need to get what they don't need. All right.
Right.
So developers don't have to worry about it. Someone has to worry about it. And that comes into play when you cross that bridge of using data from different sources, because now you're talking about different contexts. And
Right.
now you're talking about having to resolve the governance between these different contexts. It may be simple, it may be really hard. And what's more, there are probably nuances, which you didn't even think about because you're just in your silo, that you're not going to really come out until down the road. And
Mhm.
by the way, down the road, the words for that are too late. Okay. Because when you realize that you've let incorrect data in, it is usually not possible to correct it. Okay. You can't just roll stuff back because it's a whole complex process of multiple people using the data.
So one of the things that comes into my mind, Rick, is that what you're talking about these applications or systems that cross contexts and want to use that sounds an awful lot like what people are describing agents, AI agents doing. AI agents are data hungry, we hear. They want access to whatever data is needed for them to provide a successful outcome. And that sounds like they're going to be reaching across a lot of boundaries. But it sounds like that's going to put a lot of pressure on governance and maybe even raise some new needs, some new requirements on governance.
Yes and no. I mean, first of all, look, you have to have governance, okay? And I mean, governance is one of those things that people have been somewhere between whispering and screaming about for decades. I mean, literally decades. When I started talking about data at Gardner, I said, I'm just going to talk about data. But every year that went by, I talked about governance more and more till I was mainly talking about only governance, okay? Because it's so important and nobody does it consciously, okay?
Mhm.
I shouldn't say nobody, but hardly anybody,
Hardly
okay?
anybody. I agree with that.
So first of all, if agents just willy nilly go and grab data from wherever it is, they're going to produce the same value as a data grid, which is almost nothing. It tells you this data lives over there. So you can go and get it. Does that data's governance agree with this data's governance? Maybe. Do you
Maybe.
even know what that governance is? This is something, when you talk about these data marts, you're getting data from a data mart. Do you know how that's governed? Because if you don't, you have to assume it's not. But here's the good thing. One of the things about AI, if we're talking about AI as the process, AI produces non-deterministic results. Okay. AI does not need the exact structure and correctness that, for instance, transactional systems have.
Hmm.
They're doing it on the case of probabilities. And let's just go back to what I said before about sales figures. All right. If you're doing it on a probabilistic basis, eh, it's rounding error with many, many, many other rounding errors that people don't even understand. So it's kind of a little bone I have to pick. And I mean, I think there are people out there who will argue with me about this. When I was at Gartner, my last 18 months there, everyone's running around with their hair on fire saying, what does it mean for data to be AI ready? And I said, it doesn't mean anything. I mean, data is AI ready the same way it's ready for every other system, only less so because it's probabilistic and it's not
Right.
deterministic.
Don't
So, so you're right that people are going to start thinking more things cross boundaries, and the more they think that and don't do anything about that, the more trouble they're going to get in. But it's the same thing that's been going on.
okay. That's comforting in a way. So Rick, let's wrap it up by talking about governance. What do you do? What can organizations do to bring a level of governance that matches the distribution in their data sets that they're creating?
I think what they mainly have to do is first and number one is to be conscious that everything is governed. My colleague Mark Bay used to say, no governance is a governance strategy, and that
Wow.
is correct. Everything's
Right.
governed, you just don't know what it is. Okay.
Yep.
So you have to be conscious about it. Here's what is not going to be enough. We have a governance committee. Oh, great. So you have people who get 2 hours off every Friday. That's what you mean. Um, the thing about governance that's so hard is that correctness has a meaning to a group of stakeholders with a particular use case. Okay. They're happy to let other people use their governance. They're not so happy to do something that affects their data that they basically get no benefit from. If I change my governance so you can use it easier, what did I get out of it? Nothing. So in the research, I talk about this a bit. I talk about how not only can you have 1,000 flowers bloom, as it were, but you have to. Everyone has to have the ability to have their own governance. And that's as everything's running perfectly. If
Mhm.
things are being done on a ragtag, sloppy basis, there's no way around it. I mean, Joe Blow puts stuff into his spreadsheet. He can't tell you what his governance is, although it's there.
Mhm.
But you can't say you can't use that data in that spreadsheet unless you give me your governance rules. Because you know what? He's not going to do it. And one of the things about low code is the people doing this, if anything, are less aware of this than professional developers. By the way, I refer to professional developers as the dark side. So, I mean, I'm, you know, when I say
That
less than that,
that's for a future podcast.
yes. But,
We'll do
anyways, it's not the first thing is to be aware of it. And the first thing is to stop pretending that there's no difference. Can I say one more thing about this, which is important, I think?
yes, please.
Another complaint, which I used to hear a lot, and I think is kind of nonsense, is we have too many copies of data. And I always say, so is it bit for bit the same? And they always say, no, it's a little different. I said, then it's not a copy, it's a version.
Mhm.
Okay. And the problem is not having too many versions. If you have too many versions, it's because you have too many use cases. What does that mean? What's too many use cases, right? The problem is management and finding stuff. And for that, my friends, you should read my research.
Rick, this was so much fun. We are absolutely thrilled to have you as a colleague and to help us to explore the data side of low code. So, folks, again, if you enjoyed and found this conversation useful, hit the like button. Tell your friends. We're available on all the podcast distribution channels. Uh, Keep an eye out for Rick's research report. Um, it'll be available on analysis.tech for the price of your email. That's it. So thanks again, Rick. Thank you for sharing your insights, and we look forward to getting your research out there and starting to see people work it.
My pleasure. Aloha.